All right, welcome to our next episode of Connectors Club. This is our summer series, and I'm very happy to have Dale Klein with me, who I've known for a while and I've worked with before. She's helped me in a lot of my endeavors. But Dale professionally is a corporate communication and speech specialist. Now, I know her also as an author and a presentation coach and someone who just helps people who either may not have the confidence to present or want to. In my case, I remember my favorite instance was trying to memorize or at least have it in my head what I wanted to say when I went up to do an intro instead of working off the paper, which, so many of us are slaves to the speech. But this is where I know Dale excels. I've known Dale for, as I mentioned, for a while, originally from the Capital Region Chamber, where we met from the Business Referral Group. But happy to have you here with me today because of your unique angle on networking. This is what this series is about. Welcome for coming, and thanks for being here. How have you been?
Terrific, Paul. Much better now that I'm with you again. That always makes things so much better.
And I'll send you that money on PayPal in a little while. But I appreciate you taking part in this. And what I always ask, what I've asked the group prior, and one of the interviews I've done for this part is what do you like about networking? And obviously, I think people that really excel at this are really at anything. It shows that there's passion and there's interest and love in it. It isn't a task. It isn't okay for the next 2 hours I'm going to network, or I'm going to go to this event and do these 5 things and check these boxes, and then I'm done with that mission. It's going to come more natural to. I've also changed it to relationship building, not just networking. It's a little deeper. So what is it about that you enjoy? I wanted to get your personal take on that.
For me, Paul Hook, networking, and I'm looking into the camera because I want to really address your listeners now. And for me, really networking is a form of public speaking. It's my middle name. It used to be my first name. Now I think it's my middle name. Maybe it's my first name too. But I think when we network, we're really practicing a form of public speaking. And that's why I take it so seriously. And that's why I'm very passionate about it, because it is that. And the second reason, you didn't ask for two, but I'll go ahead and give you two, is that I believe that to be really effective in networking, one has to be very curious. And I'm curious by nature. So
Right.
between those two aspects, in terms of viewing networking as a form, which it is, of public speaking, and being extremely curious, those are those are the aspects of networking that I am very passionate about.
Well, I think what you're saying about being curious goes hand in hand with what often and I'm sure you've given this as advice, and you hear often is the more important part of an interaction with someone is the listening side of it. So if you're curious, you're obviously asking questions or there to listen and not just give your speech. Like, I got to make sure I get my elevator pitch in, and this is my ask and everything.
Absolutely.
You're trying to learn more and be curious about what makes somebody else tick, or what their interests are, or where there might be some mutual connections or relationships or interests and et cetera, goals. Then that curiosity is going to immediately or automatically lend itself to listening to.
Absolutely. You're 100% right. You know, Paul, part of what helps to really be curious, or a natural extension of curiosity, and you coined it when you said listening, but it's a little bit more than that from my perspective, in that I believe, and I coach my clients, that in order to be an effective listener, whether you are interviewing for a particular promotion or a new job, or you're fortunate enough to be on a podcast interview for the Connectors Club, is that one has to do a fair amount of homework. Because you want to ask questions. What are you listening for? Right? So you want to ask questions that are insightful, questions that you can't just go to their website and anybody could learn them. So they should be questions that are a bit thought provoking, that show a little bit of insight, and that really will expand the conversation. So that really helps. So it's listening, but it's an extension of listening and asking the right questions.
So just talking about all the rain we've had the last week is not that's not enough to that doesn't show enough depth, right? So no, and that is something that I know from working with you before and hearing you speak. is the that preparation part of networking isn't, and this is actually leads to my next question about, advice you give to people who are either don't have the confidence or the experience, or they know they have to do it. They think they do it well, but they actually are not really sure. They don't really get the results that they're looking for. But what is the yeah? I guess we'll go right into that actually, and just looking for some tips or some ideas from you, or what's the way that you present that? I know you've spoken on this before, but how do you help prepare people? And I think it's you got two instances where you're working one on one with somebody and get a little deeper, but when maybe you're talking to a broader group to give some general ideas and guidance that are regular mistakes or hiccups or hurdles that people face.
Hmm. One of the aspects that I help in my training or coaching of clients, whether I'm speaking to a large group or I'm speaking one on one, is to use a form of a question with which you're very familiar, and that is an open ended question. Now, that's almost a dirty word. When I use that term, most of my clients, if not all, say, "Oh, I know exactly what that is." "Oh, great," I say. "Let's hear one." And then what do? They ask me a closed ended question. And they're stymied by how to transform closed ended into open ended. It's really quite simple to do once one gets the hang of it. And we
Mm.
think about words like who, what, when, where, why. And we can also say how or tell me more, please. And, I'm thinking back to my speech language pathology days because I am trained, as you know, as and certified as a speech language pathologist. And in our training, Paul, this was referred to as a WH question. So if I use that term, that's what I'm referring to. But those are questions when we start with a who, what, when, where, why, or tell me more, or how, that really show a deeper level of insight. And so I encourage people, write them out for yourself. Why not? Because I want you to get comfortable practicing them and saying them. Maybe you'll ask them slightly differently. Maybe you'll ask an extension of that. But what that does is, once again, it opens up a conversation. And then you can have some sort of, hopefully, a repartee because one does not want to interrogate somebody. You don't want to feel like, where were you the night of, right? And so there's a WH question. So we don't want to keep popping questions at somebody like we're a reporter, unless of course we are. So that's where we want to have a bit of a give and take. And we can start with something simple like, I've learned that your company is about to have, and name a particular event. Maybe you saw that in the media or you saw that in a trade publication. And you can say, "I'm very interested in that," or "I'm curious about that. Tell me some of the details." So you formulated the subject. You didn't ask a specific question, but you used the "tell me more," and you've brought their attention in and focused them on a particular event. So what does that show the person? Well, you are clearly keeping up with the news or maybe social media or trade publication, and something that is not necessarily past, but something that's coming up. And so it pushes them to think and get excited about something that is imminent. And then they'll go on about that. Now, as they start to talk about that, this is where you might want to, really listen carefully, is that might lead you to other questions that you had not anticipated. And that's perfect because there's that curiosity factor. And then the conversation gets bigger. And one more point I want to make, Paul, is that when you ask an extended question or an insightful question, you don't know. It may be something that opens up an opportunity for that, or I call it the window of opportunity, where you can jump in and talk about how you could possibly assist, or someone who could assist. You don't know what that individual is going to say, so that gives opportunity and a potential for saying what they want to say.
Right. Yeah, but as that was a really long-winded question that I gave you there, I started with, and you just hit it with the preparation part. That's very important to that. I think a lot of us we either wing it or we think, oh, I'm just looking forward to seeing people and just having a good time, or I'm natural in my own element, or I'm a salesperson or something. But the more, obviously, and this is the same with anything, the more practice you put into something, the better it's going to be, the easier it's going to be, the less nervous you're going to be, what have you. But if it's preparing, then you've got natural questions and that's already leading to natural curiosity that you don't have to, because we've all been in the other situation where you're
Correct.
stymied and you're stuck, and then somebody's attention goes somewhere, so they walk away and they're like, "Oh, I should have asked that." We've all had those moments, and then
We have, and we don't want to run the risk, and I certainly don't want anyone who's listening to this interview to think that I'm encouraging being over prepared or being too scripted. I absolutely don't recommend that. I think we should be very natural, and I think we should be at ease. But that is not to say that I concur with winging it. I'm not a fan of winging it, as you well know.
yeah, yeah,
I believe in doing some preparation and then being prepared to step aside and go in a different direction if it seems that that is indicated. However, if I know nothing about somebody, if I haven't done any research, and it depends. Sometimes, when I'm working with a large company, I will do rather extensive research and I have a tool that I call a needs assessment. And rather than reinvent the wheel, as the saying goes, I will refer to my needs assessment. I may not ask all questions on it because maybe they're not relevant. So maybe I'll ask five or six, but they're there. And that really helps me to get my wheels turning and to get me thinking. And it may lead me down a different direction. Perfectly okay to do that because we certainly don't want to sound over rehearsed. And again, we don't want to fire questions at people. But I think in order to establish that give and take, that dialogue, you have to show some interest, I believe. And the only way I can show interest is if I've done a little bit of thinking through in terms of events coming up or what maybe they're looking at growth opportunities. Well, what kind of growth are you looking at? Tell me more about that, please. Or the company name is very interesting. What does that mean?
well, people and people like when they're able to talk about themselves and what they've done and so on, as opposed to
Right,
hearing somebody just go on and on about me and me. And this is all how great I am, and you should learn more about me. So
right.
you should hear more. So it is good to have that input and that curiosity and that inquisitiveness to ask those questions to get them to start, because people are proud of them that they're there to be able to share the story and so on.
Well said.
But,
Well,
um,
I like that use of the term inquisitive, Paul, because I think being inquisitive doesn't come naturally for a lot of people. That's okay. You can become inquisitive. You can develop that, and or you can use it in particular instances of networking. And by the way, what we're doing is, of course, networking, but there are so many different forms of networking, and I think the more the merrier.
Well, and it just leads to more interesting conversations. You can kind of script it if you just know the wrote one, two, three questions you're going to ask. You kind of know what the conversation is going to be. But the minute somebody drops something out of left field, that's when I see them from my coffee and happy hour calls that I do. That the conversation shifts all over the place based on someone's comment loosely related to something that happened, and then for the next 5 minutes we're on to something totally different, which is so much fun, much more enjoyable than
Sure,
being like rigid, like a formal focus group might be, question mark.
sure.
So I know that this technology that we're using for having our interaction now is nothing new to you, because you had international clients who worked through Skype
Correct.
back, years before any of us even heard of Zoom as a company. So it's a normal operating procedure for you, so and it's probably very common through the pandemic. But now that we're getting to a situation where things are opening back up and people are seeing each other in person more, but we still see advantages of using this technology. How do you see transitioning coming out of that? Do you see that changing much for you, or maybe it might be on the actual live presentation side of things? You might have more clients that are going to be doing that where they weren't doing it before, or do you see changes in that coming? Or do you think it's going to be very easy transition because you're already so used to it before?
That's a really interesting point, Paul. I am definitely, as you mentioned, very accustomed to using virtual communication because I do have a global reach. So prior to this horrific pandemic, I was using that means of communicating with individuals. And now, with the pandemic, as we're hopefully turning a corner, certainly that was not a new skill for me. But I think, it's richer when you're in front of somebody. I mean, I think we all know that because, but we have to take advantage of that because what we can do is, first of all, we have to make accommodations and we need to be more cognizant as even if we're doing a hybrid, some virtual and some in person. So I call it head to toe communication. So it's not just, and we want to remember this because it's not just that it's virtual anymore. Now there may be some in person. So the point is that you want to incorporate some of your more nonverbal. And not only do you, as a speaker, want to incorporate that, however, you also want to attend to any nonverbal signals from a group of individuals that you might be addressing, or it could be one on one. Pay very close attention to that. I sometimes, we can be right, we can be wrong. Sometimes I misread somebody, but at least I'm attending to it and I'm picking up. Maybe somebody is glancing at their phone, and they may not even realize they're doing it, or they may be moving around quite a bit. Maybe they're anxious and nervous. So I don't point that out to them, but I'll say something about, is this still an okay time for you and I to speak? Or if you're pressed for time, we can certainly move this to another point in time. So I think that the virtual piece has certainly taught us so much, and including a lot of mistakes that people make, which is okay, as long as we look to improve that in terms of where to look and recognizing that there is a lag for some people. In some instances, I was just doing a seminar it was a webinar, excuse me, for a large group, and it was virtual, and there was a slight lag. So you have to be cognizant of that. Well, when we're in person, there isn't so much a lag because we don't have the technology issue anymore. However, one of the adjustments that we have to make that a lot of people don't make, Paul, is for the ambiance. So if it's noisy, then what do we have to do? We have to increase our breath support and our volume so that we're easily heard. Listen, the truth is that if the other person or other people don't find it easy to listen to you in terms of your volume, your rate, the mechanics of what you're saying, your message, your passion level, they'll tune out and you may not even know it.
Right.
So I think we have to make those adjustments, maybe more so in person than virtually. And that's what I really try and help people to do, is to be cognizant of how many variables they have control over. Your intonation. So I can say, oh, really? That's a slight rise. Or I can go downward and I can sound more confident. Well, that's a fact. Boom, that's a fact. You can kind of hear that falling intonation. So understanding how to use vocal variety, understanding how to use gestures. They should embellish what you're saying. They should not be a distraction or take away. And using your entire body to help convey a message. Very important. And making that eye connection. I didn't call it eye contact. That's something a little different, but an eye connection. For some people, that is something they have to learn. Perfectly okay. Anybody can learn how to do that, and I can help them.
Well, that is you're right about the energy level in person. So with Zoom or any other format or video format, virtual format that we have where there's multiple people and you're looking at their faces, and I often do this with my calls. If someone's talking, I'm looking at the other faces to see who's reacting. If someone looks like they want to,
Good.
They might be on the phone or they might be struggling to be heard, and the microphone isn't as strong as others. I'm usually trying to pay attention to that too, but it's more intense when you're in person because there's other sensory things going on.
Correct.
Banquet, it could be smell. I mean, there's noise from in the background you might not hear in a Zoom call. You might have the distraction of a cat walking around, but and there is more empathy, I think, that people, once they've gotten into their homes and so on, so that's gotten more comfortable and acceptable and understanding. But when you get to the person, and especially if it's a larger conference, you've got quite a bit going on. Speaking of distractions, I don't know if you can hear what's going on behind me. So hopefully,
a little bit.
Yeah, the ice cream truck is probably not going to show up at your conference, but that's what we have when we're on Zoom. So we're used to that.
Darn, I was looking forward to that.
Right. I'll send them over to your street next. But
Please do.
my last question is kind of related to this, I think, and I think you
Okay.
might have actually spoken to it, and that's where do you see this moving forward? This is definitely a crystal ball question, and every time I ask it, it's a little bit different answer because we're kind of reacting when things come up. But it sounds very well like it may just be kind of what you've explained. There are some advantages of this digital and virtual version, and obviously for distance, if you're dealing with someone who's in another country or in the state, that's one thing. But then the live in-person things, we're all anxious to get back to those. It has another dynamic, but it does bring another benefit that while we want to just aside from seeing people in person, but it has that other energy and there's other benefits to having folks together all in that regard as opposed to together on the screen. Um, and how networking works into that. How do you even have a comment on how they could be, or is it just like you want to just say what I said, or what do you
I happen to
oh,
love what you said,
oh,
but I think I can add to it as well, if I
yeah.
may.
Oh yeah.
And I would say that to you, Paul, and mostly to your listeners, that as I stated at the outset of this interview, networking is absolutely a form of public speaking. Therefore, that means it's important for listeners, your listeners, to understand that whether we are conducting a workshop or we're networking and we're doing it virtually versus in person, they are not one and the same. They do have different how to's, they do have different expectations. So, winging it really doesn't work for me. And I don't recommend it to anybody I work with. I think you want to be very sensitive to your environment. And if it's visual or if it's in person, factor that in, because then of course you can't see yourself, you can't see how you look, so that's one aspect.
That's true.
You absolutely want to present as well as you possibly can, whatever that happens to mean for you,
Mm-hmm.
and be aware of your physical environment. And that would pertain virtually as well as in person. But I think sometimes as I mentioned, the environmental noise or the ambiance can be a distraction, whether you are virtual or visual. So always factor that in. You can, if you're in person, you can say, why don't we step over here into the corner area where it's a bit more quiet, get away from crowds of people. Or if you're maybe constantly being interrupted, that definitely is a factor. And what I would say that is similar, because there are some similarities, is to try and do your best not to be long-winded. Make whatever you say somewhat about you, but mostly about the other individual. Because the truth is that all communication is always about the other person. So we need to be relevant, we need to be curious, and we need to be very memorable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great way to sum up this conversation. Good point to end on, and yeah, that's what I was looking forward to, those pieces of advice and wisdom that from you training folks in that, myself and others included, that you could
But
bring forward to this, because I think that's a unique angle that I knew I would get here, and I'm thrilled I was able to have you for my summer series of Connectors Club. So thanks
thank
to
you.
Dale Klein for joining me, and check back again, folks, for the next episode. But we will see you very soon. Thanks again, Dale. We'll see you in person soon, hopefully.
My pleasure.
All right, take care.